like to welcome everyone to a Council as a Whole Committee meeting for the purpose of reviewing the fiscal year 2017 budget. This evening we'll begin with police, pages 18 through 21, Councilors. Chief Martineau, thank you for joining us. And I'd also like to just remind Councilors to please do your best to keep it on point to and germane to the specifically to the budget and the items that are before you this evening. That said, we'll begin with police personal services, and we'll proceed from there. We have a subtotal this year for police personal services in the amount of $5,032,765. Any questions for Chief Martineau? Councilor Tran.
Chief, every year the overtime line item worries me because this upcoming fiscal year we're asking for another $500,000 to be budgeted for the overtime line item. One of the things that I would like to know is what's the criteria for the overtime? Is it open to every officer in the department, or is it just patrol officers? Because what I'm trying to find out is in certain field of work, overtime is afforded to people who make under certain salary threshold. So is with the police department, is the overtime line item open to everyone?
The line item you're referring to specifically, the 500,000 plus that you're referring to, that is specific to police officer overtime, uniformed police officer. We have a separate line item for dispatches of that nature. However, this 545 you're talking about is very specific to police officer overtime. As with you, I am very concerned about it too. I specifically brought my overtime budgets, which I believe that the council receives on a bi-weekly basis. This is something that I review consistently every 2 weeks, whether I'm signing off on it or the deputy signing off on it. And I keep track of it. I keep track of the different levels of overtime. Specifically, two of the larger items are investigative overtime, which could account for detective overtime, patrolmen working beyond their shift to investigate a crime. And the second largest expenditure out of overtime is court appearances, stuff that were mandated to go to district court or superior court. And obviously there's other line items in there that come out of overtime: foot patrols, firearms, training, police services, elections. They're broken down every 2 weeks. I am, just like you, I'm very concerned. This is a large amount of my budget. We're talking $500,000 out of almost an $8 million budget. So this is something that I do pay constant attention to. But specifically to answer your question, it's police officer overtime.
And your department is not the only department that I'm worried about. The whole entire budget itself for fiscal 2016, overtime alone eats up over $1.5 million. And the next fiscal year coming up, we're also looking at close to $1.5 million for the budget overtime. Seems like we're living off overtime. Do you think it's, looking at your budget year after year after year, overtime is expense at almost the same level, close to $500,000. Do you think it's about time that we look at using the overtime money and actually hire more uniforms?
I don't believe you could hire enough uniforms to reduce this to a significant level. Like I said, some of this is mandated. There's a substantial of it comes out of contractual sick time, contractual time off, days owed, where police officers are entitled to take days off because of a collective bargaining agreement. And we have a minimum manning where we won't go below 5 officers on a shift. So some of that you're never going to replace. There's other areas, specifically training. We do a considerable amount of training, and the benefits of training speak for themselves. Our police officers are one of the most highly trained departments in the area, and we spend a considerable amount of effort and energy and resources on training. Would there be some areas if I added additional police officers? Absolutely. Last year I made a very strong, concentrated effort on putting foot patrols downtown. To do that, I had to do it on overtime because there was no way I had no spare areas within the police department to take a foot patrol officer and put him downtown. So I did it last year on overtime. Recently, because spring is here, I'm reinstituting foot patrols downtown at least 8 hours a day. However, that's going to have to be done on overtime between now and the end of the fiscal year, which I'm budgeted for. So to answer your question the best I can, we could reduce it a little bit by adding more manpower. But once you add more manpower, we're adding to other areas within the budget where there's additional cost, OPED costs and stuff that goes of that nature. So it's a balancing act, Counselor, and I do my best to make sure I can control overtime. I think I've done that well this year based on what I was given. And as you can see, my projections are very close to what I need for the upcoming year, what I spent this year.
Right, and I totally agree with that. Looking at the budget year after year, you've done a fairly good job at trying to maintain that level of overtime and not to exceed what you've spent in the last the year before that. So that's why it's difficult to make any cuts in that line item. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Counselor.
Counselor Joseph.
In your patrol officers line, you had requested $33,259,000. You got $3,140,000. The $72,000, was that for another officer that you had requested, or?
My original requested FY17 was for 3 additional officers. It was my hopes to create a specialized group of 3 officers to address certain issues like Main Street or any other hot spot that might be in the city. I'm very well aware of the constraints placed in the city, and I was excited that the mayor was able to find me a position, so I was reduced from 3 down to 1. But my original request was for 3.
Okay. And the reduction in your overtime, I mean, you plan, most likely you'll be back to us later in the year for that additional $40,000 for overtime.
It's hard to say. I feel confident with what the mayor's proposed for overtime. I was ecstatic that he was able to put some more into the budget. I'm aggressively looking for options at the state level through the House and the Senate for different earmarks for projects that I'm proposing. Specifically, once again, where we're all concentrated on Main Street, so I'm looking at other options that may help me fund that. We're continually being aggressive on grants. I'm very comfortable with the overtime that's in this budget. I can't say that I won't be back. I just don't have a crystal ball. We could have some serious crimes that need significant attention, so that's one of those areas I don't have a crystal ball to it. But I am happy with what is in here for my overtime presented by the mayor, and I will do my best to work within those parameters.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Chief, I'd just like a clarification. The reserve officers, this year we budgeted $35,000. I know you're somewhere in the ballpark of, you've spent 5 almost 6 this year as of the end of April.
Right.
And I'm aware that we haven't had a full reserve cohort at this point, and it was just instituted this year, so I wouldn't necessarily expect that you would have exhausted all your funds. However, I see a $5,000 decrease for FY17 in the proposed budget. Can you talk about why you only see 7 reserve police officers instead of a full complement of, is it 12 that we authorized you for?
8.
8, okay.
The reduction is simple. We have one potential reserve candidate that's in the military, and I'm holding his position. He will not be available this year, but under civil service guidelines, I have to hold his position until he's done active duty because he came in and signed the list, so that's why you're seeing that reduction of that amount.
Makes complete sense. Thanks, Chief. Councilor Green.
Yeah, a couple of things. Let's talk about animal control. And where are we in your department with that position?
Sure. As you see, that there was a slight reduction in my requested amount for animal control. Obviously, the line item for salaries stayed the same, and we had a slight reduction in, I projected, I'm sorry.
Counselor, if I could, does this pertain to personal services and the animal control officer? Because we'll have an opportunity during offices and supplies to discuss animal control a little bit further, as well as civilian staff support.
Dispatch and civilian support, page 20. Animal control officer, and then overtime animal control.
We're still on the personal services item on page 19. We'll have an opportunity to get to that shortly.
Okay, thank you. I'll wait.
Okay. You still have the floor if you have further questions
I do
regarding.
not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilor Boschman?
Much as I don't like to say this, but Chief, on the overtime, and I let the councils know where I used to work, what they used to do at GE, they wouldn't hire people. What they would do is they give people overtime, as much overtime as they want, because it was cheaper to pay somebody overtime than to hire somebody, because then you get into all the benefits, which everybody talks about OPEC, health, vacation, sick time. It's cheaper to keep them on overtime than to put people on, to hire new people on. That being said, the city of Fitchburg just had a big meeting, and everybody's been complaining about the speeding going up Main Street, speeding going throughout the city, and we must do something about it. Back in 2013, you gave me this book from the police department, and we had a 280% increase on accidents on Main Street,
Counselor,
Lower Main Street. That's all pertains to the budget, sir.
Does this relate to personal services?
Yes, it does,
Okay.
because it relates to overtime, and we're paying overtime. So I'd like to know, instead of having a policeman walking the beat, why don't we have a policeman with a radar gun stopping traffic from going fast? If we become like Bolton, Mass, you would stop. You know what I mean?
May I respond?
Please, Chief.
We do a significant amount of work on speeding cars. I'm very well aware of our crash data, our speed data, and we don't utilize it out of the general fund overtime budget. Like I said in the beginning, we're very aggressive on looking for grants. The amount of grants we take in from EOPS, the Executive Office of Public Safety, regarding to traffic safety, we put out there additional police officers on a consistent basis, whether we're targeting speeding, crash data, seatbelt issues. We'll constantly do that, and I would prefer to do that on aggressive grant writing than taking it out of the city's operating budget. So they're really two different animals. We do a significant amount of traffic-related services. However, we're not taking it out of this funding source. We're taking it out of something that we're aggressively going after, free grant money.
Okay.
Councilor Giantelli.
The questions that are repeatedly asked about overtime are valid questions, but as Councilor Boschman just said, many private businesses do not hire more people because it is a lot cheaper to pay $500,000 a year for overtime. I've had some people ask me, well, why don't we hire 3 or 4 or 5 new officers, which is the equivalent of $500,000, and that would lessen our overtime? Well, it is virtually impossible not to have overtime expenses in any of these kinds of departments. You will always have overtime, number one. Number two, while it is true that hiring more officers would reduce the need for more overtime, it is a lot more costly to do that avenue. If it's cheaper to pay $500,000 a year in overtime as opposed to hiring 5 or 6 new officers at $50,000 or $60,000 a clip, and then add the 35 years of pension and benefits that are associated with those 5 people in perpetuity. So that's why this happens. And there's never a question as to the necessity that we need more officers. I understand that, just like everybody in this room. But it's difficult to advocate for more officers when we don't have the money currently to have the current staff that we do across the city. And I repeat that over and over again because it is essential to understanding why someone like myself is so critical about new hires. And it's not to discourage department heads from asking for new people. It's frustrating for me more than anybody because I sympathize with all of these departments, but I guess I'm very hard line on balancing revenues with expenses, something we haven't been able to do in 15 years maybe. So before we talk about hiring more people, the overtime is here to stay. Now, on a positive note, this overtime account, if you all recall, this overtime account represents the most accurate budgeting of that account that I have seen since I've been on this council. The previous administration knowingly underfunded not only police but fire overtime accounts because they used a backdoor way to get the free cash and then supplement these guys later on because they didn't want to make the tough choices today. Happens every year. The two account, this account, overtime police, it is a guarantee every year. We use hundreds of thousands out of our free cash to balance the needs of the police department and the fire department for overtime. And this is intentionally done. I remember last year when the chief was before us, the chief said to us that he requested X amount for overtime, and the mayor gave him 75, 60% of that total. And then the comment was made by her, oh, we'll just use the free cash once it's certified to give him extra. It's ridiculous how we budget things here. So I am pleased to see that this administration is getting realistic with budgets, because by funding this account at an acceptable level, we don't have to rely on free cash next year. Now, the chief said that he can't promise that, but let's say the 500 is not sufficient. We'll probably end up supplementing it with 25,000, or even the chief could probably find it within his own budget to supplement that account through an interdepartmental transfer, not over $100,000 of appropriations. So the use of free cash is significantly, if not completely, reduced in this matter, which gives me some confidence that when the certified free cash occurs, we don't have to worry about this account. We don't have to worry about the fire account. And that's the way you properly budget. Usually I'm critical about accounts that are over-padded, or not over-padded, but projected incorrectly. This is the opposite. So this is encouraging to see, and I hope it continues. And I'll be saying the same thing when the fire chief's before us, because if you know you're going to spend $500,000 a year, guaranteed, and the mayor gives us $350,000, that to me is a slap in the face to all of us who have modicum of intelligence in financing. That's unbelievable. So this is very good to see, and it should continue. I'm not advocating they spend through their eyeballs on overtime. No one is. But let's get realistic, because with the current staffing levels he has, and the fire department for that matter, this overtime amount is a necessity to maintain services that we rely on because we can't afford to staff more people. Thank you.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to mention the student resource officer and Chief, how that reimbursement works. You work it with Monty Tech. Do you just take that $75,000 and split it as far as the reverse, or how exactly is that handled between the two schools?
I can tell you, we just entered into a new 3-year contract with Monty Tech. We were in a previous 3-year contract. We worked it out where that amount you see there right now, the $75,953. That includes a top step patrolman's pay, which is roughly $63,415. In addition, it covers some health, other benefits, other post benefits, and we've come up with this figure of $75,953. As you can see, it's zero across the board.
Right.
That gets deposited directly into the general fund, and I don't see that.
How is that affected now by net school spending? Dick, would you?
Yeah. This, first of all, this you'll see the corresponding receipt on page 5. Okay, it's 76,000 we show, but it doesn't affect our net school spending because this arrangement involves Monty Tech.
Okay.
So it's from Monty Tech, which is not part of the Fitchburg Public Schools. It's a separate school district.
Okay. So this has nothing to do with net school spending?
No.
Okay.
Let me just say, there are 2 resource officers that work in the Fitchburg Public Schools, and we do get reimbursed. That is costed out on the net school spending, besides the one at Monty Tech.
And the 3-year contract is the same amount of money for the 3 years, or?
It is. The 3-year contract's based on that, that number you see right in front of us. And like I said, that gets reimbursed directly to the general fund. If for some reason I had to do away with that position, I would be looking at a reduction in my staff because I'm not budgeted for it. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's there. I don't see that $75,000, but it allows me to have a school resource officer at Monty Tech.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chief, pertaining to the personal services line items, the head clerk and the principal clerks, how many per each of those line items do you have?
The head clerk, I have 1. Principal clerks, I have 2.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions from councilors? Moving on to benefits and stipends. We have a subtotal of $1,609,040. Any questions from councilors? Councilor Tran?
Can you speak a little bit on the stipend cell phone line item, because that was added to last year's fiscal budget.
Yes, sir.
That's an appropriation.
Yes, sir.
That was never in any of the budgets prior to that.
That was as a result of a collective bargaining agreement with the Fitchburg Police Union. Big stipend. There was an offset on some other items, and what you see now as a cell phone stipend was part of that collective bargain agreement from last year. It requires all Fitchburg police officers to have cell phones, provide their cell phone numbers to the police department in case of an emergency call-ins. It gives us the ability to reach out to 76 police officers in a moment's notice. So there were some benefits for the city. Obviously, there were some benefits for the collective bargaining group, and that's why you see it now in the budget.
Now, the wireless service, does that go through the department of the city, or how does that work? Is it the individual officer? Does it work through like a reimbursement program?
No, sir. Each officer is required to buy their own wireless service. They have to provide me with their phone numbers and allow me to have direct access to them. They're paying for their own services. In addition, there is some city-owned phones that the police department has through the IT department, and those are more for investigators in my narcotics unit and stuff of that nature.
Mm. And that covers, this line item covers all officers in the department?
It does, yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Boschman?
I just answered my question. Thank you very much. I was going to ask the same question on the cell phones.
Great.
Thank you, Chief. You did a good job.
Thank you, Counselor.
Any further questions on benefits and stipends? Seeing none, we'll move to dispatch for a subtotal of $359,278. Questions from councilors? Seeing none, we'll move to
Wait a minute, hold on, please. I'm gonna find-
page 20.
I got a question for the chief.
We have Councilor Di Natale, and then we'll go to
Okay,
you,
I didn't
Councilor
see him
Bush.
raise his hand.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry I lost my place for a minute here. 1 second. Chief, on the dispatchers for the, I apologize. I thought I had my mark. Oh, here it is. Okay. It says for the FY16 projected. Someone else have their hand up, Mr. President? 'Cause
Council, let's go to,
I'll
we'll go to
after
Councilor
them, 'cause
Boschman,
I'm
we'll go
not-
back
I
to
thought I
you.
was prepared. I'm not. Thank you.
Councilor Boschman, you have the floor.
On the dispatchers, chief, I'm going to ask this question because I noticed it's going up for almost $500,000 on that dispatchers, civilian police dispatchers. I don't know what that 74% GF means.
General fund.
General fund.
Oh, general fund. Do you think it would be economically better and really be truthful for the city of Fitchburg to go central, like I've been reading in the paper before? I know you hear this 1,000, 100,000 times. But we're almost $500,000 here, and not counting what the fire chief is. And then we also have to pay total benefits and, like everybody says, OPEC and everything else. And if we get all the neighborhood together, and we had a central place where everybody shares the cost, wouldn't it be cheaper for us to do it that way?
I don't think it would be cheaper. There's much discussion across the state. It's called regionalizing your PSAPs. We're the primary PSAP for the city of Fitchburg, and the fire department is emergency medical dispatches, where they're handling medical calls and fire calls. We've explored that. We've looked into regionalization. Last year we had a meeting with the city of Leominster talking about just that. We're looking at several different options, whether it's economically sound, if it's sound for public safety reasons. There's something to be said when you have your own 12, we have 12 full-time dispatchers who are familiar with the city, that know the streets. You go to a regional system, you might end up with someone that doesn't know the city of Fitchburg. I can tell you, honestly, there's a huge push across the state to regionalize PSAPs. There's 364 cities and towns in the state, and I want to say there's well over 200 individual PSAPs. And if you compare that to the state of California, where they might only have 10 regional PSAPs. So there's a push statewide. It's going to take some time getting there. You're dealing with collective bargaining groups. I'm not prepared to tell you it's more efficient. I'm not prepared to tell you it's less money. I can tell you what we're doing now works well. It's efficient. We have 12 professional dispatchers. I know the fire chief has his professional firefighters in there handling emergency medical calls. The system's working well now. Can it be done differently? The answer is yes.
Okay, Mike, thank you.
Any other questions from counselors? Moving on to civilian staff support, subtotal $131,077. Counselor Green.
Back to animal control officer.
Yes.
All right, so where are we with that, since that's been moved out of DPW and into your department?
This is, Council, this is still a work in progress. It may not be what everybody wants to hear. We're still employing a full-time animal control officer for the city of Fitchburg. As I've discussed in the past, kenneling costs extremely expensive, and we're trying to control the kenneling costs. Since the city of Fitchburg lost its own kennel, or we dissolved a kennel 2-3 years ago, we've been in a severe transition. As I said to this body in the past, we're exploring creating an RFP to go outside of in-house animal control issues. We know the transition going on in our purchasing department. That's one of my first things when we get a little bit more stability where that department's going. I've had this discussion with the mayor, and the mayor supports this discussion, that we're going to explore creating a request for a proposal for an independent, non-city employee animal control person, similar to the city of Leominster has. I got to caution the city council. I know what the city of Leominster is paying for their independent animal control officer, and I know what we're paying. There may not be all that initial cost savings up front. However, what it will create, it will take it most likely out of my realm, which quite frankly I don't believe it belongs in my hands. It doesn't seem to be a police function, but additionally we're going to have kenneling someone else's problem. So I had to put together a budget. I had to come up with at least a number what I think if I'm forced to maintain animal control, that it's going to cost me kenneling costs. You know, I estimated, well, we probably can't talk about it because it's later on down in the line. You know, I estimated at $75,000, and it was cut back to $55,000. I'm estimating between a revolving account and what I've spent this year, I'm going to spend somewhere around $55,000 to $65,000 just in kenneling costs. But like I said in the beginning, I know what is being spent over in our sister city with animal control. It may not be all that much of a savings, but there are other benefits, and we speak all the time about adding employees and this and that. So there's other benefits to it. Once again, it's a work in progress, It's something that I'm reminded of daily from your constituents, what's going on with animal control. I can tell you that my current animal control officer is doing exactly what I've asked her to do, and she's up to date on all her reporting. However, that being said, can we do it more efficiently? That's what we're going to explore, and I have the blessing of the mayor's office to do just that.
Thank you for that update. Thank you.
Counselor Joseph.
I'm sorry, could I go back to dispatch for just two quick questions?
Sure.
Are you fully staffed in dispatch?
I am pleased to say at this moment, yes, but that is one of those positions that is extremely fluid. The nice part is 5 or 6 of them are on the current police list. So we're seeing this great transition right now where I have people interested in law enforcement coming in to join the dispatch who are taking the civil service test, and you're going to see them in front of you as reserve police officers, and eventually you're going to see them as full-time police officers. But right now, currently, I'm pleased to tell you, yes, we are fully staffed, but that could change tomorrow. It's that fluid in there.
Is there any contractual obligation to dispatchers for overtime?
I'm not
Are they
sure I follow.
guaranteed 3 hours overtime a
No.
week by?
No, sir. The only time we fill overtime is when staffing levels are dangerously low in there. We will never go below 2 dispatches for 51,000 calls a year. That would be ludicrous. When we're at full complement, we're running with 3 in there during the peak times. You need that 3rd dispatcher just to, handle the calls, send the calls over to the fire department, making sure those are handled the correct way. So the short answer is we only utilize overtime when it becomes a safety issue in that room.
I want to recommend a cut to the overtime for civilian dispatches to $20,000. If you're fully staffed, there should be no need for overtime.
May I respond to that?
That much overtime.
Okay. Keep in mind, civilian dispatches, they belong to a collective bargaining union. They have contractual time off. Based on my projected spending, what we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years, this is a consistent amount of overtime, and we'll go from 12 to 10 to 9 to 12. So it's been a consistent amount of overtime. I think a reduction in that spot, if the council feels so, that I understand. But I believe we've spent considerably, we've been very careful on the overtime in there, and I'm showing consistent historical data that is roughly anywhere from $35,000 to $40,000 a year in overtime.
But it's been a long time since you've been fully staffed in dispatch. A long time.
We go back and forth. Like I said, it's so fluid in there. I'll go from 12 to 11, and I'll have 11 for 3 months, back to 12, down to 10. It's truly that fluid.
And how much is it dispatchers per year? One dispatcher.
I'd have to do the math. I apologize. I just have the front numbers in front of me.
How many,
I have
how many do you
12.
have? 12?
And 12 divided by,
Well, 35,000.
And is there any reason why contractually you can't hire part-time dispatchers?
that's a great question, and I don't have an answer for you.
It's just, they're not a police, I
I-
apologize, I take nothing away from what they do or what they are, but they're not professional police officers where they have to go out on a crime scene, that they have to go to court, they have to do this, they have to do that, all of the reasons why you give us the need for 525,000, hire a couple of part-time.
I couldn't agree with you more. They're not professional police officers, but one thing I got to say about my dispatchers,
They're
they are
professionals.
truly professional
Right.
dispatchers.
I don't wanna
As a
take
young
that-
police officer, I had to work in that room, and that is by far the worst job in the world. They work hard in there. We have some extremely well-talented dispatchers. The $40,000 covers my downtime when I'm not at 12 and I'm back to 9. And some people have asked in the past, why don't you put a police officer in there? I can't cross unions. Now we're getting back to collective bargaining agreements, so I can't cross those union lines. The part-time thing, that's an extremely interesting question. I would have to refer later to City Council on that. I'm not sure how that would work.
DM, I don't know.
I don't know either, but there's a lot of training that goes involved with that. The amount of training that our dispatchers go through, they have mandated yearly training, mandated monthly training. We've created a dispatch manager. I can't say enough about my dispatch, something I'm extremely proud of because, quite frankly, it's an awful job, and they do an exceptional job at it.
And I'm not taking away from that, it's just
understand.
that they're not, police officers have duties like court and things like that recur over time.
Yes,
There's not that same level that's needed at
I understand.
Counselor, typically we inclined to agree with you for overtime and most others, but with the level of fluidity and the essential nature of the staff, I'd be concerned to rely on. I think it would be that much more difficult to retain someone at a part-time dispatch level to keep them after all the training and the resources that we'd provide. They'd be just as likely to probably jump onto the force or move to another department that would offer them full-time. So for what we're getting for $40,000, I don't see that as glaring. Also, Chief, you're right. Your projections are typically spot on in this area. Past statistical or past budgets show that you're typically in that ballpark. And seeing that, at the end of April, you had spent approximately 70% of those funds already to date, you're going to be right in that ballpark once again this year.
And if I may, just one last comment on dispatch. The fluid amount of in and out dispatches, a lot of that has to do what we're paying our current dispatches. They can go over to Leominster and make almost $3-4 more an hour. So that's something as we move forward. Right now, they're locked into a collective bargaining agreement, but because them have such a great turnover, it's because their comparative salaries are that much greater in other locations, specifically the city of Leominster, and we do lose dispatches because of that.
Councilor Dintali, did you still have a point on dispatch overtime?
Yeah. It would make sense what the council is proposing if there was no fluidity. The fact that there is fluidity, and the fact that the chief said they're fully staffed right now, that may not be the case in a few weeks, may not be a case in a few months. So this is an item that, number one, has been pretty consistent around 35 to 40,000. It's refreshing to see projections that actually make sense. And I don't think that reductions in this line item, given that fluidity, is a smart thing to do. The only thing I would ever see in terms of dropping this down is if there was a contractual language insertion in there that said they can't go anywhere, but they can't move anywhere. Like basically, and this is probably never going to happen, but I'm not advocating it, but something in the language that said something to the effect of, you're here for 3 years, you can't go anywhere else. That's the only way I would see that fluidity go away. So because of the fluid nature of the position, where most of these men or women are using this as a stepping stone, which is good. I mean, that's a good thing. They get acclimated to the city system and the officers they serve. I don't think a cut in this area is warranted. Thank you.
Councilor Tran.
Councilor Tran or Councilor Donnelly?
Councilor Tran.
If Councilor Donnelly is
Y-
before me.
Your point was on civilian staff support. Was that correct?
Pardon me?
You had originally were looking to speak to civilian staff support, or you?
I want to talk about a line item that's not there regarding marketing Fitchburg.
Could we
Please
field
first.
Councilor Tran first, and then we'll go back to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Councilor Donnelly. Chief, on the animal control overtime, in the last 4 years, we've expensed no more than $12,000 for 2016 this year. We budgeted $15,000, and we still, with 1 month to go, we still have close to $7,000 available in the budget. And for the next fiscal year, we're asking again for $15,000. So I'm inclined to propose that we make a reduction of $3,000 in that line item. And then if you feel that we need to restore that line item, you can always come back to the city council.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Councilor Donnelly.
Thank you. I just want to talk, I'm always talking about marketing Fitchburg, and I think the police department is perhaps the most high-profile department. The big red trucks might be more visible, but people watch the police more closely. And I think that when people are choosing a community to live in, they have to feel safe. And the school system, safety and school system are 1, 2, can't say what order that they're in. And I think, as the chief has just mentioned, we have an extremely well-trained police force, which I think gives the general public. And if we're going to market Fitchburg and have Fitchburg progress, it's something that we have to show that it is a safe community. There are some people that do not perceive Fitchburg as safe as it is, and I don't think its reputation is marketed properly, because we are a very safe community. I just want to say that when we're trying to support a department, public safety and the police department is what really sells Fitchburg. So I want to address marketing Fitchburg every day, and I think our police force does that. Thank you.
Counselor, I wholeheartedly agree. Just want to remind folks to try to keep this germane to the line items before us. That said, we're on civilian staff support. Are there any further questions for the chief before we move on? Seeing none. Office and supplies for a subtotal of $100,200. Councilor Green.
Can you just explain to me what provision of prisoners, what that means or what that entails?
Sure. When we have someone in custody, we're mandated to feed them. If they get taken in during supper hour, we have specific dates, specific times that we will feed the prisoners in custody, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Sometimes, more than often, we're tasked to hold that prisoner for a weekend. So there's some instances where we're holding prisoners for court up to 3 days, maybe 4 if there's a holiday within our holding facility. We're mandated to supply them with a nutritious meal. The meals have gone up significantly this year. It's something that my clerk was reminding me of on a daily basis, how much the meals were going up. We have looked around, and we're still probably getting the best bang for our buck where we're getting provided meals.
Councilor Green.
Were you specifically asking about the increase, Councilor?
No, I was asking because I really just couldn't believe that it was a $10,000 line item.
We process anywhere from maybe 1,500 to 1,700 prisoners a year. And you need to figure that out of that 1,500, they're probably going to get at least one meal. Whether we're processing them at 3 in the afternoon, they might get supper, or if we're processing them at noon, they're going to get a lunch.
And this is not peanut butter and jelly or bologna on
No,
Vibe?
we work with McDonald's, and if you're there for breakfast, you get a Happy Meal. If you're there at lunch,
It's not a Happy Meal, right? Yeah. Not so Happy Meal.
Gourmet dining.
So that's our food vendor for our prisoners is McDonald's, and unfortunately their prices went up this year. The more prisoners we have, the more money we spend on food. But we're mandated. We have to, anybody in our care and custody, we have to make sure they're safe and make sure that they're fed.
Okay. Thank you.
And Chief, just it looks like you've already essentially exhausted that budget to date. Is that correct?
I think we're going to be over
Yeah.
in that budget because of the increase in costs this year.
Thank you. Any other questions for Chief on office and supplies? Councilor Green, back to you.
Yeah, I swear to God, it's not going back to the provision of prisoners. It's the chief captain search fee, and are we? I see we put aside $5,000 for that. Are we in the market for one of those?
As many are aware of, if you're not aware of, Deputy Chief Bozikas is reaching retirement age in January. Currently, we have a deputy chief's position. I'm looking at different options if I want to retain this type of command staff. It's discussions I'm gonna have later on in the summer, maybe in the fall, with the mayor's office on how I feel my command staff should look. The deputy's position, the captain's position, those are very important positions because those are administrative positions. They're not union members. If I elect to stay with a deputy chief, we have been using a process as an assessment center. I feel that's the best method to evaluate command staff. It's the same type of an assessment center that I went through that I was hired as the chief. And it's becoming the norm across agencies in the state to go through assessments for your command staff. So I asked for $5,000 to be put in there. If I retain a deputy's position, I will be looking to use that $5,000 for an assessment center. If I decide that I want to switch my command staff, which I'm looking at, to all captains, I have a current captains list, and I'll be able to save that $5,000. And obviously, there'll be a reduction from deputies' pay to captains' pay. Those are some things that I have to figure out as we move along. But I'm preparing this budget thinking I'm going to retain a deputy. It's easier for me to put that $5,000 in there now.
Thank you.
Counselor Tran.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chief, for animal control line item there under office and supplies. Last year we spent $39,000, and this year we budgeted $51,000, but we still have close to $13,000, $12,400 in the budget. And with a month to go, it's hard to agree to budget any amount higher than $51,000 when we haven't really spent that amount yet. And I understand what you just said, and I clearly support that. But until you show me that we do need the money and that we are going to spend more than $51,000, which we haven't done so for this year yet, it's hard to agree to budget more than that amount for next year.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that's a good observation on your part. Part of my problem is kenneling, and I've been talking to the person that has been doing our kenneling, and they're a little bit behind on their billing. And that person was reminded today that they need to get the bills to us. So this is going to go up significantly in the next month because I told this person I need to get this off the books in FY16. So it's going to go up significantly between now and the end of the fiscal year. Right now we're in a pretty good position. We don't have a lot of dogs in custody. But that could change next week where I'd have 5 dogs that are in the kennel. But I do know that there's a lot of bills forthcoming for the last month and a half. Traditionally, I've been trying to get bills every month, except the kennel person fell behind in billing, so that's going to go up significantly.
Now, do you have any inclination on how much all that billing will be summed up to? Are you expecting that it's going to exceed $51,000 that we budgeted for this year?
That's hard to say. We've been using a combination. We still had some money left over in our revolving account when it was transferred over from DPW. There was some funding for animal control issues that went into a revolving account. So I've been using that revolving account, trying to balance between that and the general budget. We're going to be close to that $51,000 mark. I went 75 was on the high end. Because I just don't know what we're going to have. I've seen some veterinary bills for cats that were running $800 to $1,000. So that's one of those I don't have a crystal ball for. $51,000 maybe, $50,000 maybe. I just don't have a true answer for you because I don't know what the future is going to bring on that. But I can tell you that we are spending more money between now and the end of the year.
Okay, because I was inclined to level fund that line item, and I saw the mayor increase it by $4,000, and after listening to what you said, I'll wait and see when all the billing comes in that whether we need to add more to that budget line item or need to decrease it in the future.
If you look at the FY15 actual, it was 39.1. Additional funding was coming out of revolving, which would would have brought that closer to the 51. So historically, we've been right around, since we've taken over kenneling or outsourcing kenneling, it's been pretty fluid right around that number of 50, 51. It just, sometimes those vet bills scare me, because if we have an animal at one of the veterinary hospitals and I'm responsible for their care, that vet bill could be thousands of dollars.
Speaking on our responsibilities in terms of animal control, does the liability insurance fall on your department, or is it fall under the city's umbrella?
I would have to ask the solicitor or the auditor on that question. I don't have it for you.
We do carry liability insurance for the animal kennel, right?
They have their
So
own liability.
the private party carries its own insurance.
Yes, that
Okay.
kennel has a liability policy. That was something, because I'm in this transition stage, if we're going to continue down the road of employing an animal control, we really need to look at outsourcing and locking in a kennel into a contract. One of the things that is in the RFP talks about liability insurance, and that kennel, the kennel that I am using currently, does have private liability insurance.
Great. Thank you, Chief.
Chief, we have about 10 days before we vote on the final budget. To Councilor Tran's point, would it be possible for you to maybe prod further the kennel and see if you might be able to get an updated projection to us prior to us voting on the 31st of the final budget? Is that a possibility?
I will.
Okay.
You would like a closer line of where I'm going to be at this year?
If it's possible to obtain those numbers from the kennel, I'm sure
I'll make it
we'd
possible.
appreciate that. Thank you, Chief.
Absolutely.
Councilor Boishman.
Chief, back to what Councilor Tran was just talking about, the animal control. Before I start, the only reason why I'm asking so many questions, I get phone calls today, and a lot of people are calling up because they're upset with the budget. They're calling me up, and they want me to ask questions, so I got to ask you questions. How long do we house these animals? Because if we're keeping them in there for 6 months, I love animals too, but we can't afford it 6 months. So how long do we house them for?
The simple answer is as long as it takes.
So we could spend thousands of dollars on an animal.
We have.
The only reason why I ask, Council, is that I got neighbors that can't afford the increases in taxes, and we're housing animals better than we're taking care of human beings. That's all I'm saying. And it's a shame, and that's an outright shame.
May I make one point? There's opportunities, and we're taking advantage of it now, where we're seeking restitution for some of these costs. We're going after pet owners that aren't responsible. We're looking at all options. I'm very well aware that this is taxpayer money, and when we have the opportunity, we're seeking restitution to get back some of the taxpayer money for this exact reason.
Okay, Chief, thank you.
Councilor Janey Talley.
I think it's prudent, Councilor Boishman, that if you get any calls, you need to explain to your constituents that $5,000 in animal control is not why their taxes are going up. About this line item, it was stated earlier about having a better projection for this account. I believe the projection you provided is perfectly adequate. Projection I show is it's going to be around $47,000, $48,000 if the current rate holds. We just received confirmation that there are bills that are outstanding, which adds fluidity to this account. I actually think, after hearing this information, it's going to go over $51,000. The mayor did the right thing in reducing the 75 to 55. If the mayor allowed 75, I would have said, well, that's not happening, to what Councilor Tran was talking about. But the history on this account is so small for the police, because this is the second year he's had this account. First year he spent $40,000. This year he's on track to spend close to $50,000, give or take 10%. I mean, I can't tell you not to abide by councils, but for me personally, I don't think you need to provide anything. I think you provided it. You put 75 in there, you didn't get it, you got cut down to, well, I don't want to say cut, you didn't get cut. Your increase was reduced to 55. which is more in line with what you're spending this year. And it's only the second year it's happened. So there's not enough data, in my opinion, to support that 51 is not adequate or is too much. And even if it was, you know, the last two meetings, yesterday and today, normally I'm Mr. Cutter. I didn't really want to waste everybody's time this go around in cutting 2,000 here, 3,000 here, because the underlying problem is things that we've already discussed in the millions of dollars. So cutting something here or there for 2,000 is not going to move the dial. It took me 8 years to realize that. But my point, Chief, is I believe the projection is accurate, and I believe that the mayor did the right thing in cutting it to 55, because if he left it at 75, that would have been, in my opinion, financially egregious. So I think the number is fine where it is. Thank you.
On to travel and training with a subtotal of $62,000. Questions from counselors? Seeing none, move on to vehicles and equipment, a subtotal of $218,500. Counselor Di Natale.
So, Chief, this is one account that jumped out at me, gas and oil. Now, I understand that throughout the city of Fitchburg, in all gas and oil accounts, we have seen projections and expenses that have been significantly under budgeted forecasting numbers. And I know it's because the oil and gas market right now is in the tank, which is good for the city. So I understand that the budget that you were allotted of $90,000 this fiscal year, it looks like you're trending to spend about $71,000, about $20,000 less than budget. I'm sorry, your budget is $120, and you're projected to spend probably close to $70. Now, I know it says 90 here, so I don't really buy that projection per se, but then I don't know when this projection was done and what it was based off of. But let's say it is 90, it's still $30K under budget, which is fine. You're requesting $100,000, and I'll tell you, this FY17 versus FY16 column really rubs me raw, because it's indicating that the chief is getting a $10,000 increase. He's not getting a $10,000 increase. He's getting a reduction of $20,000. You know, if the mayor wanted to do himself a favor, he'd want to show what was budgeted, because that shows a cut of $20,000, not an increase of 10. A resident who sees this is going to think he's increasing the budget $10,000. He's not. This column to me is completely ridiculous, because the 17 column is budget. The 16 projected column is actual. It's apples and oranges. It's not a comparison.
Counselor, I share your utmost frustration, but I'd hate to continue belaboring these the format of this year's budget. We'll certainly work with the mayor next year.
It's in the context of this account, in that I just want to make it clear to counselors who may not be as familiar with the status E or have it in front of them that it's not an increase, it's a cut. I guess I'm trying to help the chief out here in his presentation to say that, you know, to the untrained eye, this may look like you're getting extra money when you didn't need it this year, and you're not. You're getting a cut. Now, I would venture to say that going from 120 to 100,000 to me makes sense. That's a reduction of well over 20%, to account for the fact that, as far as I've read, because I'm in an industry that's oil and gas, dependent, the market's not going to get better this year. So I would actually take it a step further, Chief, and I would venture to propose, and I'd like to make a proposal that we cut that line item by 10,000 to 90 to reflect what he's projecting for this fiscal year, which I consider to be, in my opinion, a little top-heavy, but I don't know what the projection when it was made. It was probably valid when it was made. I think, given that we have 6 weeks left, we're not going to spend $32,000 in 6 weeks when we've only spent $58,000 in 10 and a half months. So I don't think this will hurt him, because I don't see the market coming back. But it's a $30K reduction when you add it up, if we were to approve this. This is obviously a recommendation that's on the table. Thank you.
May I respond, Counsel?
Please, Chief.
The projection items throughout this whole budget was something myself and my entire team took very strongly to heart this year. I wanted to present the City Council what I thought was true projections of our spending. Keep in mind, we did our projections the first week of February. I was anticipating larger fuel costs in the springtime. That's the reason I went to that point. We're going to see, and your numbers are spot on, Counselor, we're probably going to be somewhere around 75, 80. Yeah, I think 75, just exactly what you said, is probably spot on. I don't know what the summer's going to bring. I have no idea. If we could figure that out, we'd probably all be rich people. You know, historically, you're right. In the last couple of years, it's been 90 and 93, and obviously, you can't look at historical data when it comes to fossil fuels. I mean, we're not doing our job. But I'm trying to speak specifically about the projections. That's something myself and my team took very serious this year.
Chief, and I appreciate that. And what you said just now is where I think this document, I'm sorry, Mr. President, just because I was very critical last night, and I was hard on the people who were before us last night, but I'm not going to apologize for it because there's no context behind this column, no context. You just said that your numbers are based off of the 1st of February, which would indicate that through January actuals, that's when you guys took a look, which is what you're supposed to do. I'm looking at data now that's 3.5 months after when you looked at it for this document. So I don't expect it to be what you thought it was going to be 3-4 months ago because no one here in this room is a wizard who can tell the future. So I'm not criticizing this particular budget with projections, partly because I have an understanding of what they're based on. And I happen to think that our projection is flawed in total because different departments are doing different things, but it does help me to further understand these numbers when I know what they're based on. So thank you for providing that clarification. And I don't bear any ill will to you or to anyone who looked at the numbers a few months ago and had an idea at that time, but obviously after 3 more months in the bank, we have a better idea as we get closer to the end. So that's why I made the comment. So appreciate your hard work, and I hope in the future, if we are to show this column, we provide some context behind what the numbers are based off of. That would be helpful. So thanks for letting us know. Thank you.
I'd just add, I would not be in favor of this kind of, the oil price has gone up 50, 60 cents a gallon, depending on where you're looking in just the past 2 months alone. So while they're, if you look at a 2-year, we're certainly down significantly, but prices have risen fairly dramatically under the radar without people noticing because they're still low in the 2-year. But, if they go up another 60 cents, we're right back where we were, a couple of years ago. So I'd be cautious to cut our funding there, only to find out the prices go up. I don't see this as egregious compared to what we're projected to spend this year or what we spent in FY15. So that would be my only caution there. Councilor Green.
I see in the line item for vehicle and equipment replacement that you got 0 money for FY17, and I thought that we were having a pretty good track record with replacing, 1 or 2 vehicles a year to keep the fleet looking great and functional for everybody who needed a vehicle. So are all your vehicles in tip-top shape and you don't need new vehicles, or what happened there?
No, as you can see by my FY17 requested amount, I requested $90,000, which would replace 2 vehicles. If you go back in the item and look at FY13 and 14, for vehicle replacements, we were spending $261,000. That's when we would skip years, multiple years, on replacing cars. The City Council, the Mayor's office has been very supportive. I truly believe what you see your Fitchburg police officers driving around in is the image we want to portray. And we've been very successful at that. To continue down that road, I'm a strong believer that it's going to take at least 2 cars a year to keep those standards to where they are. I understand that budget time's a tough time, and there's cuts to be made, and unfortunately it falls on the mayor's shoulders to make cuts, and this is one of the cuts. I'm still going to advocate for more cars. I'm going to come back in front of this body in October, September, and I'm going to ask for an appropriation through the mayor's office to replace 2 more cars. I think it's that important. We talk about image, we talk about marketing the city. It all begins with what's rolling up Main Street. Do you want a freshly painted, attractive SUV running up Main Street, or do we want to go back 5-6 years ago where hubcaps were missing and it wasn't something we were proud of? I understand why we cut, and a mayor has to make those tough decisions. So you probably see me back here in the fall when it comes to maintenance, vehicle replacements.
How many SUVs do we have currently in our fleet?
We're finally at a position now, our SUVs encompass our entire first line. Our first line includes 6 SUVs, plus the supervisor's SUV, which is 7. With last year's replacements, we were able to put 2 SUVs in the second line. So we have a first line fleet of 7 cars, and we have a second line fleet of 7 cars. So we have 2 in our second line fleet that are SUVs, and the rest of them the old Crown Vics. And then we have our other cars, which are admin cars, narcotic cars. We're approximately 48 to 50 amount of vehicles in the total fleet.
Thank you.
Councilor Tran.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to piggyback on your comments regarding your disagreement on the reduction for the gas and oil line item. Historically, if you look at the past 3 budgets prior to 2016, the average for that line item was $123,000 for $123,463. So that really exceed the $120,000 that we budgeted for 2016. Even though the projected is going to be $90,000, 2016 looks like it's a rare year. So according to the average use for the past 3 years, the requested $100,000 for that line item for next fiscal year falls pretty much in line of what has been spent in actual for the last 3 years prior to 2016. So I do agree with you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Just one point of clarification, I didn't disagree with it on the reduction. I thought that was an accurate number. I'm not sure if I misrepresented myself. I don't disagree with it. I think this is more in line of actual numbers.
Based on the 2016 number, projected number that's coming in.
Oh, yes, sir, I understand.
But if I'm looking at the average use for the last 3 years prior to that.
Yeah, this year, like I said, we're right around $75,000, but historically, if you look at fuel usage, we're going to be up close to the $90,000 to $100,000 range.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Donnelly.
Thank you. On vehicle replacement, it's been a historic problem with not putting in a budget. I know years ago, we needed a few cruisers. They put it in with heavy equipment. I think we bonded it for 5 years. And what's the life of a cruiser? 2?
No, 3 years.
2 to 3. So we're still paying on something on a 5-year note that's already gone by. So just something that can be addressed whenever we can possibly do it.
Councilor Dean Taylor.
I don't disagree with what Mr. President said, nor Councilor Tran about my cut being based on FY16 only. And I don't disagree that it's a fluid account. But people need to recall what I said about the methodology. The oil and gas market, and you know, I work for a business that is heavily involved with the oil and gas market. The oil and gas market is not going to improve in FY17. Read any economic publication on that. It's not going to improve. If there was uncertainty about its future for next, and I'm only looking at next year, then I would agree, don't touch it. But the industry experts have reported to a lot of these companies that do work in the oil and gas market, don't expect it to improve for at least another year, which is why I recommended the 16 number serve as a basis for the 17 number. And if it's not going to improve, 90,000 is more than enough to cover another down year in the oil and gas market. So that's the only reason why I proposed it. If that were not the case, I wouldn't even have looked at it, because I would have factored in the fluidity. There is no fluidity next year. Thank you.
Counselor Joseph.
Just a correction on the improve and not improve. I think it's improving greatly when it goes down. I know it doesn't help you any, but we look at it in the opposite. When the gas money goes down, we improve the gas for putting them in the vehicles. I know it doesn't help your industry, but it improves. I consider it to be an improvement when gas stays stable and goes down.
All set, Counselor Joseph?
Yeah.
Unless we have further comment or questions about vehicle and equipment, we'll move on to building and maintenance with a subtotal of $195,076. If we have no questions or concerns, thank you, Chief. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, councilors, for your continued support. Mayor, thank you for your support.
Thank you, Chief.
Councilors, we have fire next. Do we have any requests for recess? Or are we good to continue on to fire? All right. Chief Roy, good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll begin with fire personal services with an amount of $5,266,862. Questions from councilors? Councilor Di Natale.
Overtime account, it was a subject of conversation for the police, obviously. Looking at your historical budgeting in this account, which clearly shows that the previous administration lowballed this account extensively and knowingly. The FY15 spending was $427,000. But FY16, I talked about this with you during the Finance Committee meeting recently when we did the appropriation for the supplement. I understand the projected number says $455,000, but I don't really know how that's going to be possible when we've got 6 weeks left and when there's still $150,000 left in the account. And the reason why I'm saying that is because it took us 10 and a half months to spend $320,000, and we're going to spend another $150 in 6 weeks.
Yeah, Councilor, as I explained when I came in for that money after talking with the mayor, obviously, we may not spend that money. However, within the last few days, we've caught up with some of the trainings that I had talked about during the Finance Committee. Also, we increased our staffing back to the level it should be. So the reason is that we had to reduce the staffing to stay. I will not overspend my overtime budget. That's one we cannot, just because, in other areas we can stay within the bucket, as you know, but that's not an area that we can overspend. So when the projection back in November was that we were going over that amount that was going to last us for the rest of the year, I begrudgingly cut staffing, and I canceled some trainings. So there may be money left at the end of the day in the overtime account, and that'll go back into the general fund.
So, Chief, where I'm going with this is I stipulate very, very simply that you've been consistently underfunded this account. You've had to come back to us, which I think is the wrong way of approaching this.
Or cut staffing, one or the other.
And where I'm going with this is, in FY13, you were given $300,000. In FY14, you were given $375,000. FY15, you were given, eventually you were given $435,000, and you practically used the whole amount. The $435,000 is now going to $455,000. $435,000 is now going to $455,000. I understand $465,000 in 16, but I think it's clear we're probably not going to make $465,000. But my first question is, were you able to perform what you expected to perform with $435,000? Because it's significantly higher than what you normally have gotten, and you used it. So where I'm going with this is, if you got $435,000 this year, instead of what the mayor usually gave you, around $300,000, would $435,000 restrict you?
Yeah, it would restrict us, and then we'd have to cut the staffing back. So the goal, Councilor, is to try and keep the staffing where it belongs 100% of the time, 365 days a year. That's the goal. Because in the past, the only reason you see the lower numbers is because I reduced staffing and cut back on training it's really mandatory training.
So why does your overtime account keep growing, though, is where I'm going? Why
Well,
does
first
it keep
of all,
growing?
because we've got increase in contract negotiations, which increases the overtime.
Okay.
And we've slowly, over the last few years, brought the staffing back from 14 a shift to 15 a shift to 16 a shift,
Okay.
which is where we should be.
Okay, I was thinking about proposing a cut here, but I'll be honest with you. It drives me crazy when we knowing, you would come before us during a budget hearing. I remember last year, and you said to us point blank, as did Chief Martineau, I'll see you guys in October, basically.
The problem is, Counselor, is that if we've lost so many positions, that if you have more bodies, then you're above the minimum staffing more often, which is a good thing. But we don't have more bodies. We've got less, so now the overtime helps us maintain the minimum all the time.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm pleased to see that it's budgeted accordingly
So am
with
I.
what it's supposed to be,
Right.
and not knowing it's going to be X and repeatedly funding it at Y, and then saying a prayer that we're going to use free cash to cover the balance.
Right, and that's what happened in
So-
the previous 2 years. We came back and asked for 100,000 each year, I think it was, in October. And then this past year, we did not get that when it was promised, and then we ended up in the position. we're in.
And I stress this point because it's important for when we have free cash, because you don't balance budgets with free cash, and the city knows that, but what the city chose to do is do a backdoor approach, okay? And what this tells me with confidence going forward, that I, quite frankly, and I said this to Chief Martineau, I am going to be very surprised if I see you guys before us again this year for more money, considering you're getting what you requested, where you never have before. So to me, that kind of tells the council that that's $200,000 to $250,000 that we will not have to appropriate next fiscal year out of free cash that we can use to something else. Which goes back to my earlier point about what poison do you want to pick? Do you want $3 million in free cash, of which half goes to balance the budget? Or do you want $1 million in free cash where you know that $1 million's unspoken for? It's for anything you want, not to use for these accounts. So I'd rather budget these accounts accurately as this account is, because that's $100,000 now we don't have to worry about siphoning away in free cash, which is bad budgeting practice anyway. Thank you.
Council Green.
Hi, Chief Wright. When we were given this paper that said Fitchburg Fire Department reduction in the recent years, and I see on here that eliminated 2 deputy chiefs, eliminated 4 lieutenants, eliminated 13 firefighters. You reduced minimum staffing from 19 to 16. That doesn't sound like that's a good thing. So I'm wondering, was this forced elimination of these positions, or through retirement, and we just haven't gotten around to filling those positions?
It was forced because over the last 10 years, when you submitted a budget to the mayor, usually it required cuts because of cuts in state aid and numerous other things that happened. So somewhere we had to start making reductions. So we've reduced 19 positions, and those are the 19 positions that we've reduced over the last 8-9 years, and they've not been filled.
So out of 54 firefighters, what you currently have on staff as firefighters,
Yep.
what should that number be?
It should be 13 more firefighters, and then the other positions fill in. We previously had 97 total people in uniform. Now we have 79. But that's the breakdown of what ranks were reduced.
Right. And are you, unless I'm missing it, are you requesting any of those positions to be filled in?
I did. I requested 2, but due to the budget constraints of the budget, I had to cut $170,000 to my request, so the 2 new positions I requested had to be cut.
So we have no new firefighters coming?
No new positions. This is basically a level funded budget.
Okay, thank you.
Council Boschman.
Chief, I want to ask you a question. We just swore in 5 more lieutenants the other day.
Yes.
Am I right or wrong? Why do we need 15 lieutenants?
We have, what we have, Counselor, is each engine company has a lieutenant. So there's 4 shifts and 3 engine companies. And then there's 3 lieutenants upstairs in the administrative staffing, our emergency management training director, our fire prevention director, and our communications director. So each engine company, as required by the NFPA standards, has a lieutenant. the three of them, and then we have 3 upstairs in administration. We've previously had 16 line, but we reduced the company and eliminated 4 lieutenants' positions back 5 or 6 years ago. 6 years.
The only reason why I asked you this question, sometimes I think we're top-heavy here. You got all these the captains and you and this, and you add up all these numbers, and then you divide it by the number of employees, and it's almost for every 2.5 men, we have a boss.
It's not really a boss, Counselor. Those people all go out the door. Everybody except for the 5 people in administration that work days, including myself, are assigned to shifts and go out the door on the trucks. Lieutenants, captains, deputies, everyone. They have additional administration duties, additional responsibilities, report writing, training responsibilities, inspection responsibilities. Additionally, each officer is assigned responsibility for a $400,000 piece of equipment. So they're all firefighters. They all go out the doors. I don't know if any of you saw the awards night the other night of our people that were nominated. 2 of them were lieutenants. They all go out the door. They all do their training. They all take care of their equipment. Everybody but the 5 people that work in administration, including myself.
Okay. And then my final question, another question for you. I was looking at the raises. It looks like you get a raise almost every year, approximately $2,000 a year or better. Is that mandatory by a contract, or every year he gets a $2,000? Dick, $2,000.
I have a contract with the city. Yes.
Oh, you have a contract.
Yeah, and it
with-
pretty much matches the union, but I have an individual contract. I had a 3-year contract that started again last year. It was the first year of it, and I'm in a 3-year contract now.
The only reason why I asked you this question, I said, Christ, I thought we were running. You were a CEO. You know what I mean? I don't want to be rude, but I just thought you were a CEO.
Thank you, Councilor.
Chief, earlier, how many men in uniform did you say you had?
79
79.
uniforms, yeah, and then 2.7 civilians is the total department.
I just see on, maybe we just need to update it, but I see 70, looks like 75 plus yourself.
I think if you look down, there's 2 in the Fire Prevention Bureau. Did you catch them on the bottom of the page?
Oh, I must not have.
And then there's the FEMA
Thank you.
director.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah, everybody isn't listed. As
Okay. I was concerned about my my rudimentary math there for a moment.
I could have made a mistake. On the beginning of on the bottom of page 22, when you look under FEMA Emergency Management Director is a position, and then Fire Prevention Director and Fire Prevention Inspector.
Seeing no further questions, we'll move to fire benefits and stipends totaling $1,098,897. Questions, Chief? Councilor Green.
The sick time buyback, do you have firefighters that are getting ready to retire? Is that what this amount?
That's always a tough question, Council, because we had unexpected retirements this past year. I didn't expect Kevin Curran to retire, and he came in one day and said, I'm retiring. So we never know about that. I anticipate there could be one that for sure, and then there's another that's a possibility. But those are all I know of. We've kind of stabilized now in the department as far as retirements. So I'm pretty sure there'll be one, and the other one's a possibility, but it won't be till after January or February.
Okay, so
That would pretty
at
much
one,
cover
it
it.
might be close to $20,000, but if it's like 1.5 or 2, it would be closer to the 40,000?
The average on a sick leave buyback is usually about $10,000 per person, but it depends on how much sick leave they have. That should cover probably 2.5 positions if I had the retirements.
Okay, thank you.
Any other additional questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to Emergency Management Director totaling $74,542. Questions from councilors? Seeing none, we'll move to Fire Prevention totaling $134,729. Seeing no further questions, we'll move to Office and Supplies totaling $31,000. Seeing none, we'll move to Fire Vehicle and Equipment totaling $242,835. Councilor Di Natale.
To be consistent with my earlier comments with the police, I'd like to recommend that we cut $7,000 from gas and oil.
Council, can I speak to that?
Chief Roy.
Council, I, as you know, I look very seriously at my budget each year. We are way under this year, but as you can see in FY13 and FY14, we were over 57,000. We weren't that far under in FY15 when the prices started to plummet. The prices are now starting to come back up. In fact, if you look at the Status E to date, we just paid another $3,000 bill yesterday that's not shown on the Status E. However, as you know, our budget's very tight. And if you look at the Status E on where we're at with the maintenance of equipment, that's always a very fluid thing, and we've already well overspent that. And within the last 2 weeks, we've had some serious mechanical problems and spent some serious money. So in that bucket, which is a very tight bucket, if by chance like this year I've got some money, then it offsets the repairs to trucks that need to be done. So if I didn't have that extra money this year, I'd be back in here asking for an appropriation. And I don't think just 1 year of reductions due to cuts in fuel costs is going to project what could happen in the year to come. The prices are already going back up, and we did spend over $57,000 in 13 and 14 in that line item.
Counselor, you finished?
Yes.
I'll just add, to be consistent with my previous comment, I certainly would not support such a cut at this time. Seeing no further questions regarding vehicle and equipment, we'll move to fire building maintenance, a subtotal of $213,000. Questions or concerns from councilors? Councilor Boschman?
Chief, are we using in your place, are we using LED lights?
We do, Councilor, and as you can see in the electricity account, that's one account I did cut this year because I've consistently seen that we reduced the cost in electricity, and that wasn't just due to the warm winter. That was due to, we've changed to LED lighting, we've changed, we just put all new energy efficient windows in the Summer Street Station. We put new weather stripping on all our doors at headquarters. We've done a lot of things as far as light ballast change out. We had the Unitil energy analysis done at all our stations. So we've now consistently seen that electricity line item is going down. So I cut that by $4,000. However, we did have to add to the fuel oil because we've been seeing that is going up. Luckily, this year we're going to, I think the average in this area is 9 days under 32 degrees this year, and the average normally is 27 days. So we lucked out this year. But again, that nothing's to say that we're not going to kick that up. But the answer is yes, we use all the energy efficient things we can, and that's why I think consistently now we've seen the electric bills go down.
Now, what do you keep your heat set at in your station? Is it at 62?
It's at 65 in most living areas, and it's 55 in the apparatus bays where the apparatus are. They can't freeze, obviously.
All right.
No water on them.
All right.
Yep.
Any further questions for the chief? Seeing none. Chief, thank you.
Councilors, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Councilors, we have one final department before us. That's building, encompassing both inspectional services and building care and maintenance. I'll offer once again if anyone needs a recess before we move in. Great. Mr. Lanciani, good evening.
Good evening, Councilor.
We're on page 36 and 37, councilors.
If I may make a comment before we have made some changes in discussing things with the mayor today. The budget was prepared by the mayor and I, but I had been out for a short while with a knee replacement, and a couple of things that we had discussed, I think that we didn't get it through with the assessors, the auditors and everything. So discussing today, I have sick time buyback in this budget on page 36. We're eliminating that line item to zero. We have overtime of $13,000, which we're reducing to $4,000.
Mr. Lanciani, can I just pause? That's it. I'll recommend a cut for, because we don't have a new budget in front of us. I'll recommend a cut for $10,000 to sick time buyback, $4,000 to which account?
We're reducing overtime by $9,000 to $4,000.
All right, $9,000 reduction over time.
But we're putting that money into a half-time principal clerk steno who's working for the Board of Appeals. So there's no change to mine. They're just moving it from one location to another.
And Just to add to what the commissioner said, the council can approve the cuts, and then it's understood that the mayor would follow this up with a supplemental budget accordingly for the part-time position, and then that would come back for approval. Because the council can't add to the line item, it would just fix the line items.
Thank you, Mr. Sayers. You finished, Mr. Lanciani?
Yes, sir.
Great. Is this to personal services or just, okay, I'm just going to read the subtotal if you wouldn't mind first. So, inspectional services, personal services line item, $401,706. Counselor Di Natale.
Mr. Lanciani, the sick time buyback and the overtime being reduced, that's 19,000. That's going to go for a part-time person.
Yes.
How many hours a week is that?
It would be 15 to 18 hours a week. We're not sure the exact hours yet. It would depend on the zoning board on the month, the week that they have meetings, there may be extra hours. Our intention is around 15 hours a week, but on the week that they have the meeting, she would be extra hours.
This person is going to be a part-time clerical support person on top of the two you already have?
Yes.
And they're going to be doing more than ZBA hearings?
If she's going to be doing all the ZBA paperwork and additional work, if she,
This follow-on work beyond just going to the hearing, right?
yes,
Okay.
yes, this is all of the
Work associated.
preparing the cases, the advertising, maintaining all the meeting minutes, getting all the paperwork prepared.
I mean, I don't have a problem with this because it's a straight transfer, but, and it's not full-time, but I have to ask. We've been burned before on part-timers. So, I think I said a long time ago, anytime I see a part-timer in here, I want written confirmation from the mayor that this is not going to creep to full-time. Because we learned last year, because of the senior center and the veterans office, that we appropriated money to add part-time support staff for them, and then they creeped over a certain hour threshold, and it triggered them being eligible for health benefits, which then defeated the purpose of why we approved it, because we approved it mostly because it wasn't a benefited position. So maybe this isn't really directed at you, but this is directed at the mayor, and consider it historical. I'm nervous because it's creeped before. So for this particular instance, I would like some written confirmation that this position will stay no more than 19 hours. And we don't get surprised next year when Mr. Stevens before is going, well, they're working 23 actually. So I just want to make sure that it stays at 19. That's all.
This is a person, a former clerk of ours that's retired that cannot work more than 19, does not want more than 19. She's trained in she's gone to all the zoning training in the past. She's certified to do all this work. I don't want 19. I want 15 to 18.
Gentlemen, to both your point, this item isn't actually before us now. We'll actually have an opportunity come supplemental time to further vet this, but right now we don't have, we're just debating a hypothetical.
With all due respect, Mr. President, I think this is going a little too far. He just told us we're cutting 19,000 from these accounts to supplement a position that will come before us.
Counselor, we'd be
as
deliberating
confirmation.
on a hypothetical that is not currently in front of us, that we vote on actually is not in our purview to vote on at this time, nor will be in our purview to vote on during the
Mr.
final
Mayor,
budget.
is this what your intention is? So we dissolve the opinion that it's hypothetical?
I have no problem, Mr. President, responding to this.
You can feel free to respond, but again, this won't come before us until the supplemental budget item, because that's not currently the budget that's in front of us this season.
But it was triggered by the reduction request. That's why it's brought up.
Right, but we'll have a conversation now. We'll have a conversation again in a month when we have a supplemental budget. I'm just trying to spare redundant conversations when we can.
I think what we're doing right now is redundant. I was prepared to stop talking until this was going on, so I'll ask the mayor through you, Mr. President, if he could answer.
I have no problem, Mr. President.
I don't really know what the big deal is here. I just want to make sure, because we were
It's at your
burned
pleasure,
before.
Mr. President.
I would prefer to stay away from something that's not currently before us. We have the cuts before us now.
Thank you.
Counselor Green.
Is it just coincidental, or did it just happen that in the data entry clerk position at $19,471 that's not been funded through that line item, that the overtime and sick time buyback equals about that amount?
The data entry clerk was requested of the mayor, as was an additional inspector, and they were reduced from my initial request to the mayor. So we took out the cost of, my budget request included, in here it says facilities coordinator. I had asked for another local building inspector, and I had asked for a data entry clerk, which would have been a full-time position. In discussions with the mayor, they were both removed from the budget request this year.
So your department is still operating with two principal clerks?
Yes,
That's your support staff?
yes.
And how many inspectors?
Right now, I have a wiring inspector, a plumbing inspector, and a building inspector, and I have a vacancy in building inspector, which we're trying to fill.
And to date, do you know how much money the building department has collected with permit fees?
I believe that the last year-to-date is $370,391.
Okay. Thank you.
No, you don't want me to talk about it. You want to wait for the next.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Counselor Boishman.
We do want to under 19 hours.
Under 19. I will seek a confirmation at that time. Counselor Joseph.
Is there,
Duly and triple
forgive my
noted.
ignorance on this one, but is there two clerks in building and two clerks in health?
Yes.
Because I'm just trying to, if I'm looking at that row of folks, where do the health clerks sit?
When you come to the front counter, the person on the right is a health clerk, and the person off to the left is a health clerk. The second position and third position are my clerks.
Okay. I got it now.
You all set, Counselor?
I was trying-
Important budget
Well, right
issues.
down
It's
the
good to
list,
get
and
it.
I thought they were- Thank you.
Seeing no further questions from counselors, we'll move to inspectional services expenses, totaling $26,200. Counselor Di Natale.
Automobile, Mr. Lanciani. Let me just ask, because it's glaringly apparent, where did that projection come from? Because right now, you've only spent, with 6 weeks left, $3,882. So who and how, when was that $14,600 projection provided?
That was projected last year, and we did not adjust it. I have not adjusted. I don't know whether Dick has looked at that at all.
When you say last year, can you tell me when last year? You were asked to project the budget value more than 6 months before the budget? Just trying to put it in context. I just would like to know, because I have a recommendation forthcoming. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. That's all.
I have not looked at that line item since last year when I proposed the budget, until we looked at what we should have for next year, and I reduced it down to 10, anticipating we have had, most of the last year, we've been one inspector short. So
You proposed this budget before the previous mayor left office?
No, the $10,000 was when we did the budget this March, April.
No, I understand the request.
The
I'm asking about
$14,000
the
I have not.
14,600. Who projected that? And when? That's all. That's all I'm asking.
I don't know when I last looked at that one.
Okay.
That was projected when we anticipated last year's budget.
I'm assuming that your FY15 and FY16 spending on automobile, is that mostly for the vehicles that your office has for repairs and maintenance and whatnot?
That's for fuel and any anticipated maintenance, yes.
Okay. When did we buy those 3 new vehicles?
2014, I believe.
14. So, it makes sense because in 13 we spent 11,000, in 14 we spent 12,000. Then in 15, the first year we had these new cars, our costs significantly declined, as I would expect them to. So I would expect that most of that money we usually spent were on those old cars that needed a lot of repairs. And then this year we're almost about to spend roughly 4,400, 5,000.
Yes.
I'm not getting the 10, so normally I've tried to stay away from proposing cuts of a small nature, but when they're so glaringly apparent as this, again, fluidity is one thing, but with 3 new vehicles, and since the inquirement of those 3 new vehicles, our costs have been reduced by almost 2/3. So we're proposing an amount that's reminiscent of when we had old 20-year-old vehicles. So because we only spent 6,000 last year, and we're only going to spend about 5,000 this year, I would like to recommend we reduce automobile by 4,000. Thank you.
Additional counselors looking to speak?
Oh, I have one more. Sorry, Mr.
Counselor
President.
Di Natale?
What is contracted services?
Contracted services is the cleaning of City Hall.
The cleaning of City Hall. Is there a custodian for City Hall?
Now, there's a contractor that cleans it.
Yep.
There's also contracts to maintain the HVAC equipment on a quarterly basis.
Okay.
And there's the runner rugs that we put out during the wintertime. 3 things that come out of that contracted services.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So we'd skip down to City Hall maintenance, right there, that would be $236,700. Questions by counselors? Counselor Di Natale?
The 25,200, it says it's projected in 16. We've only spent 5,700. So that projection's off by about $20,000. And I'm not seeing, I know these huge numbers on this page, like the 92. I recall that was a one-time hit. But 2015, we spent 2,085. What is that exactly for, Mr. Lanciani? Repair and care of supplies City Hall. Are we obligated to repair the leased space at City Hall?
We are responsible, if any of the HVAC equipment breaks, responsible to repair or replace it.
You know, it's very difficult for me not to look beyond just 1 year in this case because the projection is so off that it's actually difficult for me to figure out what the number should be, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm prepared to knock that number down significantly.
In past years, when I came before you last year, I was given a budget and told, sit here and nod. This year, I've spent time with the mayor and the auditor going over the budget. We have made some and I sat today trying to make sense of the Schedule E to the budget that I'm proposing. And I've been assured that there are some things here I don't understand, and hopefully someday we'll be able to. But the 25-2, we're looking at, if anything goes wrong in City Hall or in the old City Hall, that budget is there to be able to cover any emergencies. B.F. Brown is also under, if I have to fix something there, or any of the other city buildings that I'm told.
Okay.
And next year, my proposed budget for next year, President, I don't want to go out of order. We've put more money into other buildings. The treasurer's office has taken over many buildings recently from tax takings. And the day they take them over, I now have to find somewhere in my budget. We have 3 buildings that we currently have occupants in because we don't charge them rent. And I'm responsible. I've had to make repairs to the smoke detector system. I've had to make repairs to other things. And when the court orders me to fix those buildings, I need it somewhere. For the rest of this year, we're relying on that $25,000 to cover City Hall, Old City Hall, B.F. Brown, and the real estate that we've taken over ownership of, and I have been blessed with the responsibility of maintaining.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. And my final question is about the City Hall lease. We have spent $96,221, and I actually would say that projection makes a little bit of sense. It makes more sense than the previous one. What is the $33,000 increase to $135,000? Is that contractual?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Yes.
We went from.
It was contractual to be higher than that, and the city has renegotiated with the landlord to lower it to $135,000.
But it was the budget was $135,000 last year.
It was,
and we only
the
spent
mayor's
$99,000.
office this year, since the mayor took office, there've been negotiations. This is savings that the FRA has provided to the city for this year and for future years.
Okay, so in FY13, stick with me on this. In
Yep.
FY13, our first year, we budgeted $110,000 for leasing. We spent $94,000. In FY14, we budgeted $112,000. We spent $98,000. In FY15, we budgeted $135,000. We spent $100,000. Last 3 years, we spent $100K. But
Yes.
our budgets were consistently higher. Now, having rented property, being a renter at one time, why are we not spending what that contractual number is? Why are we coming in $20,000, $30,000 under all the time? I'm missing something here.
No disrespect, sir. My ignorance, I have never seen the lease for what we are obligated to pay or what we've paid. The prior mayor, as I said, presented me a budget, and I was to sit here and, I don't know what the numbers were in the past.
Okay.
In discussions with the financial team this year, I was told that these are the hard numbers that they have negotiated to.
Mr. Lanziani, I can actually interrupt you, and I believe the mayor or Mr. Saracen can provide further information.
You want to go first? I mean, I can speak to it as well, but go ahead.
No, the number could have gone to 100, I'm talking next year, it could have gone, it was scheduled to go to 165,000, because after 5 years, I believe we had to start paying for the build-out.
Right.
And with uncertainty with the future in that facility, and trying to balance the budget, and the cooperative effort between the city and FRA, we did meet with the director of the FRA, and he agreed, he went back to his board, and there was an agreement or a consensus that it would be just under 135,000 for next year. So that's what we were able to reduce the budget by. And the last year we did budget 135,000, but looking at the lease and also talking to the FRA, as the commissioner said, we were able to get it back down to about 102,000.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a demonstration, ladies and gentlemen, that there's a partnership between us and the FRA. We have never had the cooperation that we've had with my office and the FRA as we had, and I guess I'm patting myself on the back, but it's a collaborative effort, and we have a member of the FRA here with us in Councilor Donnelly. They've been very, very receptive to trying to keep us in that building and also working with our budget. So, and to the credit of Dan Curley, stepped forward and reduced us to 135. The initial negotiation called for a build-out. That's where that 165 comes from. That build-out never happened. So it took us sitting down and agreeing to bring it more in line with what we could handle today. So that's why we're at 135. There's no subterfuge going on here.
So in
Thank you.
FY 13, when we budgeted 110, was that what was on the document?
I do not know.
In FY 14, we budgeted 112. Was that on the document?
Again, as I said earlier tonight, I've never seen the lease. I do not
I'm
know.
not disputing the build-out issue. What I'm talking about is, this is a lease that has a value tied to it, and we consistently do not spend it. So forgive me if I'm skeptical of what I'm seeing this year, when the last 4 years, we didn't spend what the budget was. So that 135 last year had a build-out in there, and that's why we spent 100? I just heard 165. 135 right here. I'm missing something.
I negotiated it down.
Okay, but if it was 165 with the build-out that didn't get negotiated down, my estimation was we would have spent 30,000 less
Would you
than that.
rather we spent it, Counselor?
I wouldn't rather we spent it, Mr. Mayor. You stated earlier that we are deficient in inspectional services. Instead of blowing 30,000 in this account, we could give them another inspector. So I want to see the lease document that says we owe them 135 this year, and I better see that we spent 135, because this is a lease. There should be no gray area here. I'm going to make a request, Mr. President, that we get the FRA lease document. I've never seen it. I'd like to see it. I want to see it say 135, and therefore I'll expect that we spend 135. I don't want to spend 135, but it's a lease. So I don't understand why we keep underrunning. That's all. This isn't really a criticism of this administration. Again, forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, who are new to this process. I am a little gun-shy considering what we were going through the last 8 years, where I'm asking these questions now. Okay? I'm not doubting what's being said. I am simply asking to see the lease. Because the last 4 years where we put a number on this page, we didn't use it. And I'm sick and tired of hearing that we don't have money for certain things when we keep underspending this and it could go somewhere else. That's it. It's a lease. It should be clear, cut, and dry. I don't understand what the discrepancies are.
Counselor, I'll request that lease.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Counselor Boishman.
You mentioned earlier that you got other buildings to take care of. I was under the assumption that we weren't going to make any kind of repairs to the things because the people were not paying rent.
We will make the repairs that the court orders us to make. The first house we took over had tenants in it.
Right.
The housing court ordered the city, as the landlord, to make repairs. I'm under an obligation to the housing court in the city of Fitchburg to make those repairs.
So you're telling me the tenants took us to court? Are you saying the tenants took us to court?
The house was in housing court for other issues at the time we became the owners of it. We were ordered to make repairs. I've had to change locks on other buildings that the city took over. The money had to come from somewhere. We've had to go in and repair things because of vandalism.
Counselor, does that conclude your question?
Well, it's going to have to be all done. That's the answer he gave me.
Counselor Donnelly.
Just the explanation. They didn't take the city to court. The city took them to court. And the court made a judgment that they have to vacate, but the city also has some responsibilities to take care of things before they vacate. So they didn't take the city to court.
Counselor Tran.
Going back to the contract services, that line item was spent about $6,500 last year. This year we budgeted for $1,400, and so far we spent $7,200, leaving us about $6,700 left. We spent $7,200 in 11 months. How are we expecting to spend $6,700 in the next month if the projected amount is gonna be $1,400 the $14,000, the whole amount?
Some of it is maintenance of HVAC. We leave a little bit of a cushion there. While I was out with my knee replacement, the HVAC quit working. We had to bring someone in. So we are leaving a cushion there. I've also been very fortunate in that line item, and I went and spent some more time today. Some other city department paid 3 of my month's janitorial services. I'm sure that department's going to want the money back from me. We have maintenance of the carpets, a bill pending of $1,200 to clean the carpets, which we had put off. We did spend less this winter because of the weather. We didn't have them cleaned as often, but they are sadly overdue. We've already been given a quote, and that's probably going to be done shortly. So when I put we've paid, I believe there were 8 months that were paid, and 3 of those were paid by another department. So I'm sure when he gets, when I went and looked at the status E today afterwards, and I went through all my line item and said, why, we found that the DPW paid my cleaning bill for 3 months. I'm sure Lenny's going to want that money back from me.
So we underused this year's budget, and the leftover money you're going to transfer or ask for in order to transfer that over to DPW to pay for whatever they expense for your
I'm sure
department.
we'll just do an internal
Right, but
through Munis.
It's an internal correction that would be reclassifying the expense. It will charge that budget the $2,100 and then credit the DPW department for $2,100.
which I don't mind. But my question is, then why are we budgeting for next year at $14,000 again?
The contract has not been rebid for 3 years. The contract is due for rebid. We're anticipating an increase or a better cleaning service.
So you're anticipating an increase of more than 100%. Well, how much is the contract right now?
The contract for the cleaning is $700 a month. The quarterly cleaning of the HVAC equipment varies based on whether it's a quarter they're replacing all the filters or they're just doing a servicing. And again, out of that $14,000 line item, not all the expenses came out of that one. In this bill, there are other accounts that the clerk that worked for me last year took some of the out of a different line item in here. That there will be a correction. The $14,000 the $14,000 will be exhausted by the end of the year in some corrections that we found today internally within our own budget later this afternoon, and the ones where the DPW paid some of the bills. The $14,000 will cover the cleaning and the HVAC maintenance and the runners that we put in the building, the carpets and that.
All right, thank you.
Are there any further questions from councilors regarding City Hall maintenance? Seeing none, we'll move to other buildings, the subtotal of $22,000. Any questions from councilors? Seeing none, that'll conclude our hearing for this evening. Thank you, Mr. Lanciani.
Thank you, councilors. Mayor.
Second.
Motion to adjourn.
Can I
Mr. Mayor.
make a statement? Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to take the opportunity to thank, this is outside of the budget, thank the fire department this evening for their Civic Days dinner at the Senior Center. They put it on every year. Proceeds go to Civic Days. I also want to thank the Civic Days volunteers and, more importantly, and most importantly, the staff that works on Civic Days, Diane Barnett and A.J. Turigny and others from the city. So we want to thank them and thank Joan Goodwin at the Senior Center for her help as well. The fire department did a great job and we appreciate it. Thank you.
In line with the thank yous, I just once again I'll do this at the conclusion of each. Just thank all the department heads who are here in the evenings. I know that's it's a busy time of year, but I appreciate them coming and being a part of this process. Councilor Joseph.
I mentioned to the mayor and Mr. Saxon when we came in this evening that I kind of missed the revenue, overall revenue discussion, the rationale, the discussion usually that the mayor opens up with for our first meeting. And I was just wondering if we could get a revenue recap before our next meeting, because I just want to, I mean, we're going over.
Do we need to have that posted on the next? Do we need to change the law?
Can I make a,
I mean, we're going over a budget that's based on revenues, and I just want to know the stability of the revenues.
Counselor, it may not be this next meeting. We just need to check to make sure, see how it needs to be posted for open meeting law purposes, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday next week. We'll find some time to include that in.
could it not be just a statement by me? Does that have to be posted?
It's questions or deliberations by councilors. Certainly, we just want to make sure it's opportunity for.
I'm thinking at in the final meeting, perhaps, just
Certainly budget related, I think it all fits in.
so it wouldn't have to be.
I can add